The sentence Alara stood motionless in front of the council, her eyes fixed on the ground, but her mind was sharp. The cold metal chair beneath her felt like an anchor, keeping her tethered to reality. But her thoughts were far from the cold, sterile room. She had expected this moment, but now that it was happening, she couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The council members, seated in their high, imposing chairs, looked down at her with indifferent expressions. To them, she was just another criminal, another soul to be disposed of. But to Alara, this was her life, her future, her fight for survival. One of the council members, a tall, middle-aged man with gray hair and a harsh voice, leaned forward and addressed her. "Alara, you have been accused of crimes against the state. There is no denying the evidence. Your actions have cost us valuable resources, and you have shown no remorse." Alara didn't flinch. She had never shown remorse, and she never would. It wasn't that she didn't care. It was just that she had never believed in the rules of the world that judged her. To her, survival always came first. It always had. The man continued, "The punishment for your crimes is severe. You will be sent to a remote planet, one where your skills might serve you, or get you killed. You are to face a planet filled with apex predators, beasts that hunt and kill without mercy. This is where you will die. There is no escape." The words hit Alara like a punch to the stomach, but she didn't show it. She had expected this, but the reality of it was still hard to swallow. They weren't just sending her to a prison or to some far-off world. They were sending her to her death. But what they didn't know was that Alara wasn't afraid to die. She had faced death before. The harsh environments of battle had taught her one thing. It wasn't death she feared. It was losing control. As long as she had control, she could fight. And if they thought they could kill her by sending her to a planet full of monsters, they were mistaken. The council member's voice snapped her back to the present. "Do you have anything to say for yourself, Alara?" She lifted her head, meeting his gaze. "I'll survive," she said, her voice calm but firm. "And when I do, you'll regret this decision." A murmur went through the council. They seemed momentarily uncertain, but they quickly regained their composure. The tall man nodded to his colleagues. "Very well. Your sentence is final. You will be sent to the planet immediately. May you find your fate there." Alara was escorted out of the chamber without another word. As the doors closed behind her, she allowed herself a small smile. She wasn't worried. They had underestimated her just like everyone else had. But that was their mistake. Her journey was just beginning, and she wasn't going down without a fight. The planet's fury. The cold grip of space felt endless as Alara hurtled through the black void, her ship shaking violently from the forces of re-entry. She clenched her teeth, her hands tightly gripping the control panel, refusing to let herself lose control. The stars outside the small viewport blurred into streaks of light, her descent into the unknown becoming inevitable with every passing second. Then, with a deafening crash, the ship slammed into the planet's surface. For a moment, everything went black. Silence. Absolute, unyielding silence. Alara's body jerked in her seat, the harsh impact throwing her against the harness. Slowly, her senses returned, and she gasped for air, feeling the weight of the crash. Her ship was wrecked, barely a smoldering shell. But she was alive. She pulled herself out of the wreckage, the emergency lights still flickering dimly in the cockpit. The ship was completely broken, its systems fried, leaving her stranded in the heart of an alien world. Through the cracked viewport, she could see the planet in its full, terrifying glory. A thick, green fog stretched across the jagged landscape, and towering trees with spiked, twisting trunks loomed like silent sentinels. The sky above was a constant swirl of dark clouds, thunder rumbling in the distance. This planet was alive with chaos, every element seeming to be in a state of perpetual aggression. Alara unstrapped herself, moving swiftly and efficiently, her training kicking in. She knew she had no time to waste. The moment the ship had landed, the ground had begun to tremble. She could sense it. The planet's fury was awakening. This was a world that didn't welcome intruders. It wanted to consume them. Stepping outside the wreckage, her boots crunched on the alien soil. The air was thick, heavy with humidity, and every breath felt like inhaling a mixture of smoke and decay. Her eyes darted around, scanning the environment. There was something out there, watching, waiting. It wasn't long before she heard it. The distant rustle of leaves, the low growl of something much larger than any animal she had faced before. Alara instinctively dropped to the ground, blending into the foliage, her body pressing against the wet earth. She wasn't sure what kind of creature was nearby, but she wasn't about to take chances. Then, she saw it. A massive figure emerged from the mist. Its silhouette was monstrous, with glowing yellow eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness. Its body was covered in thick armored scales, and it moved with terrifying grace, the earth trembling beneath each step. The predator's head was large, crowned with sharp, bony protrusions, and its jaws opened wide, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. It was a hunter, and she was its prey. Alara's heart raced, but she remained perfectly still. The creature's keen senses could easily pick up the faintest sound, the smallest movement, but her training had taught her one thing: patience. As the creature drew closer, Alara held her breath. She wasn't going to make the first move. Not yet. The predator stopped sniffing the air, its nostrils flaring. It knew something was out there. The hunt had begun. For a moment, Alara's world shrank to just the predator and herself. The space between them was alive with tension, each of them waiting for the other to act. Then, with a sudden sharp snap of its head, the creature lunged toward her, but Alara was ready. She rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the predator's massive claws as they slashed the air where she had been. Her heart pounded in her chest, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The chase had begun, but this time, she wouldn't be the one running. The first hunt. Alara's breath was ragged, her body low to the ground as she darted through the underbrush, keeping just out of reach of the massive predator's claws. The creature's growls echoed through the dense fog, its steps like thunder, each one vibrating through the earth beneath her. It was fast, faster than anything she'd faced before, but Alara had the advantage of wits, not just speed. The beast's claws slashed again, but this time Alara wasn't there. Or wasn't. She had anticipated its attack, her instincts guiding her through the chaos of the planet's deadly terrain. As the creature charged past her hiding spot, she scrambled to her feet, eyes darting to the thick vines above. Without hesitation, she pulled herself up, her fingers gripping the vines like a seasoned climber. The predator's eyes were wide, its massive head snapping from side to side, trying to track her scent. Alara didn't wait for it to get closer. She knew that in this game, the moment you hesitated was the moment you lost. She swung herself up higher into the canopy, using the vines as her lifeline, until she reached a point where she could see the creature's movements clearly. From here, she had the perfect vantage point. It couldn't reach her, but it didn't need to. It was smarter than that. The beast suddenly stopped. Its head tilted, its glowing eyes narrowing as if it could feel the shift in the air. Alara's heart pounded in her chest. It was waiting. It knew she was nearby, and it was learning, adapting. But Alara wasn't just going to wait around. She had studied every battle, every hunt, every moment where her survival depended on more than just brute force. She grabbed a handful of small, sharp rocks from the ground and tossed them in different directions, creating the illusion of movement. The predator's head snapped toward each sound, but it still couldn't pinpoint her location. She smirked. Using the distraction, Alara dropped silently from the trees, landing on the soft earth with barely a whisper. Her target was momentarily distracted, its attention fixed on the sound of rocks skittering through the forest. This was her chance. Alara's fingers brushed against the blade she'd salvaged from her wrecked ship. She had no idea how long it would last, but she'd make it count. The hunter became the hunted now. She crouched low, her movements calculated, slow, like the predator itself. She wasn't rushing. She was waiting for the perfect moment. The beast growled in frustration, its enormous form turning in circles, claws raking at the ground. It could sense her, but it couldn't see her. Ilara's heart beat steadily, her every sense honed in on the creature's next move. Then, it pounced. It moved in an instant, its jaws snapping shut with a terrifying speed, aiming straight for where Ilara had been standing. But this time, she wasn't there. She had already moved. With a swift, controlled motion, Ilara dove beneath the creature, her blade flashing in the dim light. Her strike landed just under its rib cage, quick, precise, aimed for the heart. The yow. Predator let out an ear-splitting roar, the ground trembling beneath its final, desperate thrash. Ilara didn't stop. She used the moment of confusion to her advantage, rolling out of the way as the creature's death throes shook the earth. It was massive, powerful, but in the end, it was just another part of the planet's twisted game. A game she was now playing better than anyone else. The predator's massive form crashed to the ground, its glowing eyes dimming, and the jungle fell silent once more. Ilara stood, breathing heavily, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of the next threat. She'd survived this one, but she knew there would be others. Bigger, stronger, more intelligent. And she would be ready. The deadly competition. Ilara's heart still raced from the fight. But there was no time to savor her victory. The planet had no mercy, and the brief silence around her was shattered by the screech of something much larger and more vicious than the predator she'd just killed. The air was thick with the scent of blood, and the ground seemed to shift beneath her feet as the jungle began to rumble. Something was coming, and it wasn't just another apex predator. Ilara quickly climbed the nearest tree, her senses on high, alert. Her muscles were sore, her body aching from the previous battle, but she couldn't afford weakness. She crouched, listening to the sounds below, heavy footfalls, loud breaths, the crushing of leaves underfoot. It wasn't one creature. There were more, many more. The trees parted, and out of the shadows emerged a group of humans. But they weren't like Ilara. These were not soldiers, not survivors. They were criminals, just like her, cast aside to fight for their lives on this God-forsaken planet. Their faces were dirty, their eyes wild with fear and desperation. They were a ragtag group, but they carried weapons, crude ones made from scavenged materials. A few had broken pieces of Ilara's wrecked ship, while others held jagged knives, or spears. One of them, a burly man with a scar across his cheek, looked up, his eyes meeting Ilara's. His gaze held no surprise. In fact, there was a certain coldness to it. He knew she had seen them and he didn't care. He smirked, giving her a half nod before signaling to his group. The humans didn't hesitate. They had learned the brutal lesson of this planet quickly. Trust no one. They'd become hunters not for survival but for sport. They were here to kill, to conquer. And Ilara was no different. Ilara's instincts kicked in. She knew the score now. They weren't just trying to survive. They were part of this twisted game, playing for their lives and the sick thrill of hunting each other. She'd been thrown into a deadly competition, and it was clear. Alliances were temporary. Trust was a dangerous commodity. As the group advanced, Ilara quickly surveyed her surroundings. She could already tell that they were no match for the creatures of this planet. But they didn't need to be. What they had was the ability to work together, to outnumber their prey. And if she wasn't careful, that would be her. The scarred man pointed his spear in her direction. "Come down, little lady," he called out, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't want to make this harder than it needs to be." Ilara's eyes narrowed. They weren't here to fight a beast. They were here for her. She dropped from the tree in a swift, controlled motion, landing silently behind the group. She didn't give them the chance to react. Her blade flashed in the dim light as she took out the nearest one, a young man with a wild look in his eyes. He never saw her coming. The others spun around, their weapons raised, but Ilara was already moving, using the dense foliage as cover, her body a blur of calculated motion. She could hear their panicked breaths, their shifting footsteps as they tried to corner her. But she was never in one place for long. It was then that Ilara realized the truth. This was no longer about survival. This was a game. one where the rules had already been set. And as she took down the next two, she understood that this planet's twisted reality wasn't just about surviving the predators, it was about surviving the other humans. The scarred man's eyes burned with fury, but Alara didn't wait for him to make the first move. She was already gone, slipping into the shadows, leaving them to wonder if they had made a fatal mistake in underestimating her. She would survive this game, just as she had survived the beasts. But she would have to be smarter, quicker, and more ruthless than ever before. Ilara's shift Alara had always been a soldier. Survival was simple when you thought of it that way. Fighting, killing, living. But after days of hunting and evading, predators fighting off desperate humans, she started to feel something she hadn't expected, something that unsettled her more than any beast or criminal ever could. The rush. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. There was a darkness, a strange satisfaction in the chase, in the hunt. The planet had changed her in ways she hadn't realized until now. As she stood over the corpse of another competitor, a smile tugged at the corner of her lips, something sharp and cold. The man had been powerful, dangerous, but he hadn't been fast enough. Not fast enough to outsmart her. Ilara wiped the blood off her blade, her eyes scanning the dense jungle. Her senses had sharpened, her body attuned to the rhythm of the planet. Everything here, from the creatures to the humans, was a potential threat, a challenge. But the more she fought, the more she became a part of the environment, flowing with it, adapting to it. In the beginning, the thought of killing had felt strange, even necessary. But now it was just another skill, another tool in her arsenal. The winds shifted. A distant roar of an apex predator echoed through the trees, but Alara didn't flinch. She was no longer afraid of the beasts. She had faced them head-on and won. She understood their movements, their patterns, their behavior. The planet's monsters, once terrifying, were now just another hunt to her. She climbed a tree to get a better view, watching as another human group moved below her. They were scavenging, gathering resources, completely unaware of the predator lurking in the shadows behind them. They were weak. Not like her. They moved in panic, eyes darting nervously around, already giving off the scent of fear. It was easy to tell who would survive here and who wouldn't. Her hand gripped the sharp edge of a broken shard of glass she had scavenged from a wrecked ship, another weapon to add to her growing arsenal. She had learned to use anything and everything to her advantage. She was becoming something different, something better. As she dropped from the tree and silently approached the group, a sudden thrill of excitement bubbled inside her. She didn't hesitate. She never did. Her movements were fluid, precise. She struck before they even saw her, taking down the closest one with a clean swipe of her knife. The others turned in shock, but Alara was already on the move again, too fast for them to react. For the first time, she realized that she wasn't just a survivor. She was a predator too. She fought with cold efficiency now, using the terrain to her advantage, striking when they were least prepared. She had no alliances anymore, no need for them. They were all competition, they were all prey, and she was the hunter. With every kill, the darkness inside her grew stronger. The rush of the hunt became an addiction, and Alara couldn't shake the feeling that she was beginning to embrace the brutality of the world around her. The line between predator and prey had blurred. She had crossed it, and there was no going back. She stood among the fallen bodies, panting, her body alive with the thrill of the hunt. For the first time, she felt something she hadn't expected: exhilaration. The planet had changed her, yes, but in doing so, it had freed her. Freed her from the rules of the world she'd known. Freed her to be what she had always been capable of, becoming a force of nature. She was no longer just Alara, the condemned soldier. She was Alara, the hunter, the ruler of this savage world. The ultimate prey days blurred together as Alara moved deeper into the jungle, each step taking her farther from the woman she had once been. Her senses had become sharper than she could have ever imagined. The forest wasn't just a place to hide or run. It was alive, a living maze of sound and shadow. She could hear the faintest footstep of a predator before it even made its move. She could smell the fear of another human from miles away. The scent, like blood in the air. She was becoming one with the planet, and the planet was becoming part of her. But there was one creature she had not yet faced. One she had heard about in whispers from the other survivors. They spoke of it in hushed tones, as if the mere mention of its name could summon it. The Worm King. It was a legend. A beast larger than any Ilara had encountered, older and more cunning than anything she could have imagined. It wasn't just a predator, it was a ruler, a creature that dominated this savage world with sheer force and intelligence. The Worm King was said to stalk the depths of the jungle, its scales like armor, its eyes glowing with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. No one had ever killed it. No one, until now. Ilara had tracked it for days, following the faintest traces of its existence. A broken branch, a footprint too large to be any of the usual predators, the scattered remnants of a kill, too vicious and too clean to be anything but the work of the Worm King. She had come to realize that the other apex predators, the ones she had been hunting for sport, were mere children compared to this creature. They fought for territory, for food. But the Worm King? It fought for control. It was the apex, and everything else was beneath it. And now, it knew she was coming. She had no illusions that this would be easy. The moment she stepped into its domain, she would be tested, pushed to the very limit of her abilities. This was no longer a game. This was war. And Ilara was ready to fight. The jungle shifted. The trees parted as if they knew something was coming. And there, standing in the shadows, was the Worm King itself. The jungle shifted. The trees parted as if they knew something was coming. And there, standing in the shadows, was the Worm King itself. It was even more massive than she'd imagined. Its body was a mountain of muscle and scales, its tail swishing through the thick underbrush like a whip. Its eyes, glowing a deep red, fixed on her instantly, and Ilara felt the ground beneath her tremble with the weight of its gaze. The Worm King wasn't just an animal, it was a force, and it regarded her not as prey but as a challenge. The moment stretched into eternity. Ilara and the beast locked in a deadly staring contest. Then, with an earth-shaking roar, it lunged. Ilara didn't hesitate. She knew that if she didn't act fast, the Worm King would tear her apart in seconds. She rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding its massive jaws as they snapped shut with a deafening crack. The ground beneath her shook as its tail lashed out, sending trees toppling in its wake. She couldn't match its size or strength, but she wasn't trying to. Ilara's strength was in her mind, her strategy, her precision. She darted between trees, using her knowledge of the jungle's terrain to her advantage. Every second counted. The Worm King was relentless, but it was not invincible. As the battle wore on, Ilara began to see the pattern. The Worm King wasn't just attacking with force. It was testing her, learning her moves, adapting to her strategies. The more she dodged, the more it grew frustrated, the more it adjusted its attack. Then, she saw it. The gap in its defense. The soft underbelly, just beneath the armored scales. It was an opening, a small one. But it was all she needed. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and leapt. She ran toward the creature with all the speed she could muster, rolling beneath its massive form, feeling the heat of its body just inches away. In one smooth motion, she drove her knife upward, straight into the soft spot she'd spotted. The Worm King let out a deafening scream, a sound so primal it shook the trees around them. Its body convulsed, thrashing violently, but Ilara held on, driving the blade deeper into its heart. The creature's movements slowed, its once glowing eyes dimming as its life force drained away. With a final, guttural roar, the Worm King collapsed to the ground, its enormous body crashing into the jungle floor with a thundering boom. Ilara stood over it, panting, her body covered in sweat and blood, but her mind was clear. She had done it. She had killed the Worm King. The jungle around her was silent now, save for the distant cries of lesser predators. The planet had lost its ultimate hunter. And Ilara? She was no longer just a survivor. She was the ruler of this wild, untamed world. But as she looked down at the fallen creature, she couldn't help but wonder, what would be the next challenge? What would it take to push her even further? For Ilara, the answer was simple. She would find out. The new ruler. The jungle had fallen eerily silent, the last echoes of the Worm King's roar, now a distant memory. Ilara stood amidst the ruins of the battle, her breath slow and steady, her pulse the only thing reminding her that she was still human. The Worm King's enormous body lay in a heap, its once glowing eyes now dim, its reign over the planet shattered. For a moment, Ilara simply looked at the creature. It had been more than just an apex predator. It had been a symbol of power, of dominance over every living thing on this planet. And now, it was nothing more than a corpse. In its death, something inside Ilara shifted. She had come here to die, but instead she had become something more. She had become the hunter, the survivor, the one who controlled this savage world. The power that had once belonged to the Worm King now pulsed through her veins. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The air was thick with the scent of victory, and yet, a strange emptiness tugged at Ilara's chest. She had killed the most fearsome creature to ever walk this planet, but in doing so, she had left a power vacuum behind. The jungle was vast, filled with other creatures, some as dangerous as the Worm King, others more cunning. She could feel their eyes on her, watching from the shadows. And then there were the humans, the criminals, the survivors, the others, who had been cast away here by the council. They would come for her. They would see her as a threat to their dominance. Or perhaps they would see her as an ally. But Ilara knew one thing for certain. No one else would control this planet. Not if she had a say in it. As the shadows deepened, Ilara made her decision. She wasn't going to wait for them to come to her. She would be the one to hunt them. She would become the ruler of this place, not by force alone, but by fear. She walked away from the fallen Worm King, her steps slow and deliberate. The jungle seemed to part for her, as if it recognized her now. Her blade, stained with the blood of the beast, glinted in the low light. It was a symbol, not just of the lives she had taken, but of the power she now commanded. A rustling sound behind her caught her attention. She turned swiftly, her hand on her knife ready to strike. But it was not an enemy. It was a figure stepping out from the trees. A lone survivor, eyes wide with fear, dressed in tattered clothes, a scavenged weapon in hand. Ilara didn't flinch. She merely raised an eyebrow, the corners of her lips twitching into a small, knowing smile. The survivor stopped in their tracks, clearly unsure of what to do, eyes darting between the dead Worm King and Ilara. I saw what you did, the survivor said, voice trembling. You're the one who killed it. The Worm King. You're the new ruler. Ilara studied the survivor for a long moment, letting the tension hang thick in the air. Then slowly, she spoke. You're right, I am the ruler here, and you, like the rest of them, will learn what that means. Her voice was calm, but there was an undeniable authority behind it. The survivor stood there for a moment longer, fear still evident in their posture, before nodding in submission. Ilara's eyes never left them as they backed away, disappearing, into the shadows, no doubt spreading the news of her victory. She turned her gaze back to the jungle, her kingdom, now fully in her grasp. The predators would obey her, the survivors would fear her. And when the council finally realized what had happened to her, when they understood that she had turned their punishment into a triumph, they would be the ones who would regret sending her here. She had survived. No, she had thrived. She was no longer just a soldier or an outcast. She was the ruler of this planet, the true apex predator. And she wasn't done yet. With a final glance over her new domain, Ilara's lips curled into a smile that was equal parts triumph and challenge. The planet was hers now, and the hunt, it had only just begun.